Listen, Donald Trump said when the lead up to the 2016 election that he could kill somebody on Main Street and his supporters would still support him. So I think there's always a group of people. Maybe it's a third of the electorate, maybe it's 25% of the electorate. It's a smaller portion than it was before. It will support him no matter what. So we have to accept that. The question, Henry, I think, is how impervious is he to domestic political considerations? What you heard about the price of eggs was occurring in the lead up to the 2024 election, right? When he had something to lose. Now, yeah, I mean, whether he really cares about his Republican Party, whether he cares about...
Donald Trump loves to project the image of the ultimate strongman, the master dealmaker who can bully any nation into submission with a single tweet or a shower of bombs. But behind the aggressive rhetoric and the tough guy posturing lies a chaotic, terrifying reality. Trump has walked blind, folded into a massive, strategic trap in the Middle East, and he has absolutely no idea how to get out. That is the damning assessment from Ross Harrison, a leading Middle East foreign policy expert and senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. In this explosive analysis, Harrison strips away the flag-waving propaganda of the reactionary media ecosystem to reveal that Trump is completely paralyzed by an escalation trap of his own making. He can't launch a full-scale military surge without triggering a global economic depression, and he can't back down without exposing his entire America First strongman act as an absolute fraud. Meanwhile, it's ordinary working-class families who are paying the price as the risk of a widening conflict drives up the cost of fuel, food, and everyday essentials. What is at stake here isn't just global stability, it's the economic survival of everyday people, the accountability of our public institutions, and the dangerous reality of a billionaire-backed leader who is entirely insulated from the real-world consequences of his reckless foreign policy. If you are new here, take a second to subscribe, it really helps the channel. I'll give you my full thoughts at the end after the clip.
Very welcome. As usual with these sort of issues with the Strait of Hormuz, it depends who you listen to, but Iran and the US saying completely conflicting things with regards to those two ships.
Yeah, it's not unusual, Henry, for this to happen. I think what we're seeing here is that Donald Trump is in what we call an escalation trap, in that he can't really achieve the objectives that he wants, which is capitulation on the part of the Iranians, by escalating. And he can't de-escalate lest he admit defeat or some kind of falling short of his war objective. So what you're seeing is, you're seeing him, instead of waging strong kinetic actions, strong escalation, you're seeing him sort of a minor kind of soft escalation, which is agreeing to escort ships, claiming it's a humanitarian objective. And the Iranians, on the other hand, have very little to lose, or they have less to lose. I'll restate it. They have less to lose by escalating than de-escalating. So if they escalate, they claim they attacked the ships. If they escalate, then they've reestablished deterrence. If they de-escalate, then they are weakening themselves when they get to the negotiating table. So each party is kind of caught in their own sort of trap in a way, with very, very different incentives. And that's what you're seeing. And what we hope for, Henry, is that this will ultimately lead to both parties de-escalating and then move back to the negotiating table. But that's not what we're seeing today.
And is there any prospect of course, we have the talks in Pakistan that were cancelled and J.D. Vance didn't end up going to, which was widely reported at the time. Is there any date for a sort of future negotiation or third-party conversation?
No, if there is a date, Henry, it's opaque to us. We don't certainly know what it is. I don't think there is a date. I know that the Pakistanis are talking to the Americans and they're talking to the Iranians. But in terms of actually creating some kind of a critical mass or pathway towards the negotiating table, no, I think it's the opposite. I think you're seeing negotiations take place, by the way, but they happen to be taking place in the Strait of Hormuz. With each party trying to best the other so that when they get to the negotiating table, they're in a strengthened position. So right now they're negotiating using military means, and hopefully that will ultimately lead to some kind of a de-escalation that'll take them back to the table. But right now we don't see it.
What do you imagine the US will be willing to compromise on, and the same with the Iranian side, in perhaps what was mooted at the first round of negotiations?
Well, I think for the Americans, what's important, or at least for Donald Trump, what's important, is that he's able to claim that he got some kind of a concession on the nuclear issue that is better than the JCPOA, the deal that he walked away from, the one that was negotiated in 2015 by Barack Obama. So he can claim that, and that the Strait of Hormuz is open. Those are the two main things that he's given up on, I think, on the fact that the leadership is going to change in Iran. He's basically focusing on opening up the strait. And we have to remind your viewers, the strait was open before the war started. This was a consequence of the war, and getting a better deal than he had before. On the Iranian side, it's very clear what the Iranians want, or what the Iranians need. They need to survive, and they need to have reestablished deterrence, Henry, because during the last war, last year, almost a year ago, June, at the end of that war, when the United States and Israel attacked Iran's nuclear sites, at the end of the war, Iran believed it had lost deterrence. And it knew, in fact, I talked to President Pezeshkian at the time about this. He knew that a follow-on war would occur. He didn't know when. So he kind of knew that this war that we're in now would occur. So I think what's important to them, since they knew, why did they know the war was going to come? Because they knew they had lost deterrence. So for the Iranians, the key is recreating deterrence so that Israel and the United States have a disincentive to do this again. And so what they're willing to do is do whatever it takes to get out of this war, but maintain deterrence and maintain at least their right to enrich uranium and get some kind of an economic lifeline, some kind of economic, whether that's in the form of tolls through the Strait of Hormuz or unfreezing of assets or some kind of sanction relief. Those are the things that are important. Is there a convergence? I think there is. Whether Donald Trump can give up his goal of capitulation on the part of the Iranians, which is not going to happen, as long as he can be flexible and do that, there's probably a deal to be had. But if he's basically going back to the same old playbook that took him into this war and has kept him in this war not having achieved his objectives, then who knows what's the future.
And the domestic pressure of the pocketbooks, as you'd say in America, of voters. You've got important midterm elections, of course, coming up in just a few months' time. And I mean, we're having a very live conversation in this country about, fertilizer, for example, and obviously the cost of petrol and diesel for people to put in their cars. How much is that? Because I remember during the election when I was in Washington and other states, it was all about the price of eggs and it was all about the price of groceries. Now, with that increasing over in the States as it is here, is the pressure starting to turn some of his supporters against him, President Trump, or what's the sort of state of play?
Donald Trump said when the lead up to the 2016 election that he could kill somebody on Main Street and his supporters would still support him. So I think there's always a group of people. Maybe it's a third of the electorate, maybe it's 25% of the electorate. It's a smaller portion than it was before. We will support him no matter what. So we have to accept that. The question, Henry, I think, is how impervious is he to domestic political considerations? What you heard about the price of eggs was occurring in the lead up to the 2024 election, right? When he had something to lose. Now, whether he really cares about his Republican Party, whether he cares about the Senate or the House turning, we don't know. A normal president would feel the pressure that you just alluded to, and that would be baked into his decision making, presumably, on how to proceed with this war. But I would not, I'm not. It's not clear to me that he is that responsive to the traditional bread and butter issues and political pressure that we would be seeing heading to a midterm with any president but Donald Trump. It's just not clear to me at this point.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciated. Ross Harrison is Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, author of the new book, Decoding
The Reality of the Escalation Trap. The script exposes the hollow nature of Donald Trump's strongman posturing. While right-wing media outlets and billionaire-backed propaganda machines cheerlead the conflict, Trump is actually paralyzed. His demand for total Iranian capitulation is unachievable. Waging full-scale war would trigger total Iranian retaliation, closing the Strait of Hormuz, destroying regional energy infrastructure, and plunging the global economy into a Great Depression. Conversely, he cannot de-escalate without shattering his carefully manufactured tough guy brand. As a result, he is stuck executing minor, superficial military maneuvers to give the mere appearance of action, exposing the manufactured crisis. The analysis cuts through right-wing media spin by highlighting a truth systematically ignored by reactionary commentators. The Strait of Hormuz was perfectly open and stable before Trump began his aggressive bombing campaign. The current shipping and energy crisis is entirely self-inflicted. The administration is now attempting to present a potential return to the original status quo as a historic victory. In reality, returning to the starting position after causing massive global economic damage, inflation, and loss of life isn't winning, it is forcing the public to pay for the cleanup of a disaster the leader manufactured. The insulation from democratic accountability. In a healthy democracy, a normal leader facing upcoming elections would be forced to seek a diplomatic exit due to the domestic pressure of rising grocery prices and skyrocketing fuel costs. However, Trump's hubris and reliance on an insulated, culture war-driven base mean he feels completely impervious to traditional bread-and-butter political consequences. He is entirely willing to let working-class families absorb the devastating financial blow at the petrol pump and the supermarket just to protect his own ego from the optics of a diplomatic compromise. The systemic cost to the working class. The outro concludes by framing the conflict as a textbook example of the dangers of reactionary populism and elite-driven foreign policy. The billionaire class and right-wing media ecosystem manufacture the outrage and the conflict, wrap it in nationalistic flags, and leave the working class to suffer the real-world economic fallout while the elites remain entirely untouched. It serves as a stark call for diplomatic accountability, public institutional oversight, and an end to reckless foreign policy that sacrifices the economic survival of ordinary people.